Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Information's News Summer School, week 3 of our News Summer School program. I'm so excited about the session we have today. We have two extraordinary and accomplished journalists with us. Carrie Budoff Brown is the editor of Politico, and Jennifer Forsyth is the deputy investigations editor at the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to turn it over to them right away so they can tell you a bit more about their careers and the work they do. They both have presentations, and then afterward we'll have plenty of time for questions from the participants. So take it away, Carrie.
Great, thanks, Wendy, and it's great to be here with all of you. I'm going to click on a screen share right now, so stand by. Okay, there we go. Okay. So I just wanted to, there's some of my contact information. As you know, I'm the editor of Politico, and I wanted to walk, just briefly through my, path through journalism, just because, I used to find it instructive to sort of get a sense of how people got to where they were. And, just very briefly, I studied political science and urban planning at Rutgers University. I did a bunch of internships. I always felt that, it was just extraordinarily important to just sort of do this work and get the opportunity to do better, right? And you're only going to do that by getting these opportunities, getting clips, and, finding your way through. So I spent, most of my college years doing internships at local papers and, of course, the New York Times, which isn't so much local anymore, but I reported out of the New Jersey State House Bureau, and you'll sort of see a common theme now for me. Out of college, I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, which used to have a program for young journalists. It was very much a training program where you would go in and get placed in towns in the suburbs and get real on-the-job experience. I covered small towns, planning board meetings, lots of local issues, and this will be a theme you'll see when we get past my resume, where I'll talk about the value of that. After that, I jumped to the Hartford Courant, where again, I stayed on the local scene covering city halls, and then eventually the governor and the legislature. It was at the Hartford Courant where sort of my path towards political reporting became clearer. A woman who hired me asked me what I was interested in, and I said, I like politics. And she said, wow, I need a woman. I remember this very clearly. I need a woman to cover politics. And that's what you're going to do. That's what she told me. And I would say at that point in my career, I was maybe 23 or 24. I was like, oh, okay, that sounds great if you need that. Was sort of set on a path there. That became, obviously what I'm doing to this day. From there, I jumped from the Hartford Courant. I jumped to the Hartford Courant, then I moved back to the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I covered state politics, focusing on statewide campaigns. And then in 2007, late 2006, I read about Politico starting and sort of looked at the landscape at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was, as you can tell from that date there, it was a very tough time for local media. Really the beginning wave of what we've seen, our industry struggle with. And I decided, I'm going to leave, the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was riskier to stay there. I sort of told myself that at the time. It was riskier to stay at the Philadelphia Inquirer than it was to go to a startup. That's sort of how, I sort of made a calculation at that point in my career that even if a startup failed, that by being part of something that would stretch me was going to be worth it. Because what I saw at local newspapers at that point, I really didn't know whether I would have a career, given how much I started struggling with the internet back in the mid-2000s. So I joined Politico before its launch in 2007. covered the US Senate for a bit, then jumped onto the presidential campaign in 2008, followed Barack Obama around the country for a year, and then moved over to the White House, where I covered the healthcare law getting passed, Wall Street reform, a bunch of big policy issues. At that point, I was looking for how I would make my mark at Politico, how I would stand out. And I decided that specializing and finding a place where I could be the authority within a newsroom where there were lots of authorities on politics, I had to figure out what my own path was. Where could I become the indispensable expert? And Politico, as a new publication, didn't really know how to cover, didn't really understand at that point how to cover an administration with policy issues, the intersection of politics. And I carved out this space where I would dig in on these big initiatives that the president was pushing through at the time, a massive overhaul of the healthcare system, and decided, I'm going to become the expert on that. Nobody anywhere in my newsroom will be able to sort of touch the authority that I will have on this. And then in about 2014, I was frankly getting sick of Washington. A lot of the stories felt the same to me. I needed a break. I was interested in going overseas, and just so happened at the same time, Politico was trying to do in Europe what we did in Washington in the United States. And I was lucky enough to be asked to go over there to help launch our operation in Europe, served as a managing editor until I was asked to come back here in 2016. At the end of 2016, took over the newsroom a week after Trump was elected, and have been doing this ever since. So I think just, you'll hear from Jen, and she has a presentation. What I was trying to do, I don't know why I mentioned that, but I thought I'd sort of boiled down a bit of what I think I've learned over the years that says something. I'm hoping for the audience that is here will be, instructive. What I have learned through covering, God help me, I think 2 decades now, which is, I just can't believe that that's the case, but, 2 decades of reporting. These are sort of like the essence of sort of what I have learned about journalism, about political reporting. One is work a beat and do it in person. Find a job or internship that forces you to talk to people, to go into a city hall every day, to work sources face to face. There's no better way to learn how to be fair and accurate and credible than having to go back every single day and talk to your subjects in person. This was a lesson I learned early from covering town halls, and from how do I continue to work a beat and still write tough stories about them. And that experience, working a beat in person, getting out there from behind a computer, looking for those opportunities, particularly early in your career when you're honing these skills, I would say is critical. Second, explore the country. A lot of the media, the industry is obviously being, we're sort of congregating in these big, urban centers now. And I felt if you have the ability or the opportunity to, in your earlier years, get out there outside of these big urban centers where journalism is practiced differently. Washington journalism, you can go to the Hill, which is great, but a lot of it is, you're DMing and you're doing stuff over electronics, like getting out into the country, taking those opportunities to see and experience different communities and cultures and regions of this country. And when you have that opportunity through a job, particularly early in your career, I would just say that, if you have that ability, I would encourage you to do that. A big one, be yourself. Early on in my career, particularly in political reporting, tends to be a very male-dominated field, at least, 15, 20 years ago. And I would say even in the early days, years of me being at Politico, there is a style. You're looking around, you're trying to figure out who you are as a journalist, and you're looking at all these different models around you, and you're thinking, well, should I be like this person? Because this person clearly gets the job done, but he also does it in a way, either, going out and drinking with people after work, or slamming down the phone and yelling, F you, berating sources. There's a lot of that I was sort of exposed to. These are just sort of specific examples. And I was trying to figure out, I would say probably until my early 30s, who am I? And coming up with the confidence to know that there are different styles of reporting. you need to figure out what works for you and don't try to be somebody else, because it probably won't work as well. There's great reporters and there's lots of different ways to do this job. Obviously, at the end of the day, you need to be fair, accurate, and trustworthy, but there's different ways of getting the information. For one person, it may be screaming and berating a source until they are so scared they have to come back to you next time, or it can be a different way. Just find your own way and be yourself. Constantly expand your source network. Commit to calling a certain number of people every day. Again, in politics and in political reporting, and in every type of reporting, but particularly political reporting, it's about who's talking to whom and what you're hearing and really being in the mix. Anytime I would get depressed, it's usually because I don't have a great story to work on or someone isn't calling me back. And there are reporters, I had a great reporter who worked in my newsroom who had sticky notes, across his computer. He's like, when you're depressed, pick up the phone, make a call. And because if you don't have a great story, you're not going to get it just by sitting there. Make the investment, constantly expand your network. Check in with sources when you don't need anything. Source building is like making friends, but don't become friends. I know some people do become friends, and that's fine. I think it complicates things. But again, it is about making that investment with your sources so you are constantly on their minds. Always make the extra call. I have this gut check when I would write stories and really do anything these days. Will I be able to sleep tonight? Or is there something in that story that will keep me up, that will have me spring awake at 3 a.m. because I didn't make that extra call, because I didn't make sure that everything in that story was buttoned up? And if something is nagging at you, don't ignore the feeling. If there is a story with your byline on it, if there's something in it that just doesn't feel right because you don't quite know, you kind of think you know, but you don't know, then you don't know, right? Make that extra call. It will save you that heartburn later. And also a sleepless night, of which, I've had some. So this follows on the same thing. Read your stories line by line after an editor is done. It's your name on the top of the story, and you should be able to stand by all of it. Again, test your assumptions. I think political reporting is obviously, it has had its fair share of hits in recent years. I always tell my newsroom that right now we have to test our assumptions. And this holds true all the time, but particularly in political reporting where everything is so polarized and there's different ways to come at stories. It's so critical on every beat, but just because something looks a certain way, don't assume that that's the way it is. And we all come to journalism with our own set of experiences and, yes, biases, but the challenge is about keeping that open mind as you go into a story and making sure that you are not reporting towards a pre-baked narrative. That can get us in trouble. So it's about always testing your assumptions. Aim to kill it every day in your current job before you ask for that promotion, then ask for the promotion. I sort of encounter this quite a bit in my job since I moved into editing and leadership about 5 years ago. I think, sort of when you get a beat, when you get a job, there's no bad beat that you have. Every beat has tremendous stories to be found. I would become very much remember in the early years when I was reporting on the Planning Commission, the challenge of coming up with interesting stories that could rise to the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer would seem daunting, but sort of getting in that mindset that every beat has great stories to be told. Even if it's not the job you want forever, it's not the beat that was your dream beat when you were in college or in high school or in your 20s or 30s, take that and kill it every day. And then ask to move forward. And my last thing is be kind and expect the same from others. I think that particularly for those of you who may want to rise into leadership positions one day, but even what you should expect as journalists in any newsroom in this country, that a healthy environment where people are supportive and respectful and a high-performing newsroom is not mutually exclusive. Anybody that tries to tell you that this is just the way newsrooms are, You should not accept that. You should expect people to be kind. You should be kind, and you should expect it in return. Those are the healthiest newsrooms. And I think if you follow, a sense of, expectations on how, you're going to be and others are going to be, I think this is maybe more in your control if you were ever to go into management. But I do think that even as reporters, what you should expect from the places that you work is common values like that. So with that, I am going to pass it back over to Jen, and we'll take your questions after Jen.
Carrie, thank you so much. That was just terrific. I realized I forgot to introduce myself when we started. I'm not the important person here, but I'm Wendy Pollack. I'm a senior editor at The Information based in New York. Jen, go ahead if you're ready.
Thanks, Wendy. And Carrie, that was great. I mean, there were so many times where I was thinking, yes, that's right, that's right, that's right. It was really a terrific presentation, and you guys are all lucky to hear from Carrie on this. I'm going to attempt to show you a couple slides too, so bear with me. I hope this will work. That looks right? Hold on a second. Can you guys see that, Wendy?
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. So when I was preparing for this, I decided that the way that this might work, trying to think about my career, and especially a career as an investigative reporter and then an investigative editor, I went back into the basement the other day and I found the very first clip that I ever had for a paid job. So let me see here. So bear with me. I'm having to figure out the technology here. Okay. So this was my very first paid story. It was from 1993. It was for New York Newsday, which doesn't even exist anymore. And so I know that this seems like a very long time ago and it's dating me. But the thing that I thought was interesting, I was a freelancer at the time. In fact, I had a different name at the time, maiden name. But it was just a feature on this boxing ring, this boxing gym in Brooklyn, New York. And it was one where I had kind of gone quite a few times to look for story ideas. And only because I really don't like boxing, but I find the world of boxing and the people who are attracted to it and are trying to kind of like survive in that world to be an interesting font of stories. And so when I was there at Gleason's gym, I stumbled upon these little girls who were being taught to box. They were ages 8 and ages 10. And so I pitched to Newsday that I do a feature story for them on these people who were teaching little girls how to box. And there was this kind of debate going on with some of the people who thought that this was a good idea, including women coaches and women in sports, because they were basically saying like, maybe this time has arrived. This was something little boys learn to do. They learned how to defend themselves young. Why shouldn't girls do that? And then some other people who basically were saying like, this is a terrible idea. Boxing should go away. It shouldn't be expanded to little girls. But the thing that kind of struck me is that while I don't consider this an investigation that I would publish now in the Wall Street Journal, or if I did, it wouldn't be framed in the featurey way that I have in this story. It did show that I always kind of gravitated to like, what is the right thing to do here? And can I get to the answer? And so I kind of just pulled that out. And what I think it will show you is that even when I was a young freelancer in 1993, or once I started kind of having a very fledgling career as a reporter, then at bigger newspapers, and then eventually at one of the biggest, I was always looking to do investigative work. And here are some of the topics that I went back and I found in my old kind of basement clips of investigations that I had done through the years. And the thing that I want you guys to know about that is in every single one of these examples, it was while I was covering a beat. So I did cops and courts and prisons in Plattsburgh, New York. I did gambling in the state legislature in Shreveport, Louisiana. I covered education and governmental affairs in Fort Worth, Texas. And it wasn't until I had kind of built up that body of knowledge and had done routinely investigations off my beat that I was able to apply for the investigative team in Fort Worth at that time and make the case that I deserved to get that job so that I could do investigations full time. When I ended up applying to the Wall Street Journal, went right back to beat reporting. I did not get on an I team at the Wall Street Journal. I was hired as a commercial real estate reporter. I knew nothing about business, had never covered business before, certainly had never covered commercial real estate before, had to figure it out, dug in. But once again, I was always looking for the investigative angle. I was always filing FOIAs. I was always looking for documents. I was always trying to kind of figure out who was really screwing whom, and how can I get that story into the paper. And so then when I became an editor, even then I wasn't on an I team until many years into my tenure at the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to highlight just one investigation, and I picked this one just mostly because I think it's very accessible to everyone. It's actually not a typical Wall Street Journal investigation in that it's not about business. This is an investigation that the Wall Street Journal teamed up with PBS's Frontline, and we did this investigation into the Indian Health Service, which is a government agency that provides health care to millions of Native Americans, mostly in the West. And the Journal, independent of Frontline, had been investigating negligent medical care within that agency since about 2016 and published its first investigation in 2017. But the nature of that story was talking about the problems in the quality of the health care that the agency was giving out, like failing to detect cancer in patients, botched surgeries, women dying at pregnancy, etc. And just about the time we were going to publish that investigation, a doctor working at the Indian Hospital in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, was indicted on allegations of sexual abuse of his patients. And our reporters, said, look, this isn't even what our investigation is about. What do we do with this indictment? We felt like we should mention it in our investigation, but then we decided we're going to dig deeper on that later. So after we published our investigation on the problems in the agency's healthcare, then we really started looking into this guy by the name of Stanley Patrick Weber, because we suspected that there had been a cover-up if his abuse had happened over many years, like the indictment had alleged. And it soon became clear to us that the Indian Health Service had transferred Weber from one reservation to another, despite numerous complaints about his conduct, and that the agency had tried to silence whistleblowers. So the story grew in length and in scale to the point that we decided we wanted to do a video, we wanted to do a documentary. We reached out to Frontline to see if they would be interested in joining up with us. And I think a couple of the things that I want you to know about this particular investigation, that it was very difficult to do because we needed to talk to Weber's victims, and a lot of their lives were chaotic. Many of them had very difficult childhood, and then had very difficult adulthood. They had been in and out of prison. They had been struggling with crime and addiction. Some of them didn't own phones. This was a very poor part of the country where Weber had been attacking these children, and they struggled to scrounge together gas money sometimes to join us, even with interviews. Sometimes the only time that we can communicate with them was through Facebook, which they could check if they were near a computer, like at the library. So many of the interviews were conducted in cars, like traversing the sprawling reservations because there was no place to meet. including one where reporters tracked down a key witness just as he was getting ready to be discharged from tribal jail and like intercepted him there and talked to him there. And when I asked the reporters at the end of this project for this film how many phone calls they thought they made for the project, the two main reporters on it estimated that they had made more than 400 calls trying to reach people on the reservations, most of which were dropped calls or did not return. They also probably did we filed more than 100 FOIAs, public records requests, on backgrounds of Weber and other doctors that we ended up looking at. We did license background checks eventually on about 850 doctors in all 50 states. We did more than 1,000 court searches, and we used several government databases to overcome some reporting obstacles. And I'll say all this to kind of like toot our own horn about what the Wall Street Journal did. But what I want to do is use that as a prism to say, like, what exactly is an investigation, and also kind of what does it take to achieve it. And one of the things that I'm always asking reporters is this something new? Is this something no one has revealed before? What is our unique reveal? I'm always asking that question. What is it that we are going to say that no one has said before? And also, what is the harm? Has someone been harmed? It's not enough just to say someone broke the rules, although sometimes that's important. But really, if it matters that they broke the rules, then we should be able to say that. And then we should be able to say how this might be remedied. And I also ask a lot about, are we going to hold someone accountable? And that means specifically someone. Lots of times we just kind of want to talk or walk around who exactly was responsible, but I want to name names in investigations, and I want to hold those people's feet to the fire. And one of the things, for example, when we're doing COVID investigations, I'm always asking which public official made this decision, specifically that person. Then we're always doing kind of a cost-benefit analysis. Can you get the information you need? How long will it take? Is it worth it? If we dive into this investigation, we're leaving a bunch of other ideas on the table. Is this the one that we think, if we expend the time and resources to call 400 people or file 100 FOIAs or do 1,000 court searches, will there be payoff in the end? And how do we know? And then, do we have access to the right people, the right documents? Do we think that we can talk to the people who will be able to convince us that we have the story that deserves telling? And often I'll say, and is there data? Data skills are really important in investigations because they help us quantify how bad something actually is. And so we ended up, here's kind of a summary paragraph that we produced, an article and an hour-long documentary. The two news organizations subsequently revealed dangerous doctors and negligent administrators across the agency, forcing the federal government to overhaul how it cares for some of the nation's poorest and most vulnerable citizens. And it led to a White House task force specifically to figure out why things had gone so badly with Weber. So one of the questions that I think is very obvious for you to answer is then, okay, well, where do I get the skills and where do I get the experience to do this? And so I'm going to take off my Wall Street Journal hat for just a second and switch to my hat with as a member of the Investigative Reporters and Editors Board. And one of the things that IRE does, its mission is to teach data skills, help you find documents, teaching you how to do interviews, how to find a great story. It provides tip sheets. It gives you access to all kinds of past investigations by great news organizations free of charge so you can see how they do them. And it has a great mentoring program that lets you kind of meet the professionals in the industry that are doing this kind of work and can help you figure out how to do it. And right now, I grabbed the membership rates for students. It's $25 annually. And we're also getting ready to have the virtual conference for the first time. It's virtual. You won't have to go in person. You can sign up. And that's for the week of September 21st. And it's $50 if you're a student, which is a big discount over what the professionals are charged. It's not free of charge to students, but it is an incredible investment in your career, especially when it's so hard to follow the path that Carrie and I were talking to you about, which is to kind of start out as a smallish paper, work to a little bit larger one, work to a larger one still, end up as an investigative reporter on an I team. That path is so difficult to follow now as the industry contracts. So having the skills that investigative editors or editors like Carrie, who just need diggers, are looking for is so important, and IRE can help get you there. And with that, I'll toss it back to Wendy and Carrie.
Jen, thank you so much, and congratulations on that investigation. I encourage everyone to check it out if they haven't, and also to take Jen's advice and to join IRE if you're not already members. It's a great organization with and it has so many resources, whether you're at the start of your career or many decades into it. So we've got some great questions come in. One is that several people have echoed is we'll say that they apply for jobs, they apply for internships, and they don't even hear back. What can they do to make themselves stand out?
Hey, maybe I'll pop in on that one. I would say, I don't want to speak for Jen, but I got a lot of rejections too. There were a lot of people who did not return my calls. They're probably still working, and I'd love to find them and track them down. I guess that's just a reality, right, in any environment. And it's about persistence, and it's about figuring out the right ways in. I'm looking at the chat too, and I'm seeing you guys are listen, we're in a really weird time. We can't go to conferences. We can't go to the town hall. We can't, ask for coffee with editors. We're in an unusual environment. So I understand that. My hope is I am speaking optimistically that we will get to a point where things may go somewhat back to normal, but there are ways into this. I mean, my best advice is just to keep pushing it. And it may be at some point, you learn you didn't have the right clips. So you just got to keep writing and publishing and honing your skills and making sure that you're applying to the right person, at the right time. There's so many different factors, but I would just say this is a reality of any job market. I was tremendously frustrated in my early years and humbled by the rejections that I got, and just would find, I guess it's just about being resourceful. I don't know if I have a magic bullet beyond that other than take whatever opportunity is presented, even if it's to publish one story here or a story there, and then be persistent about the follow-up. Jen, do you have anything better than I could offer on that front?
The only thing that I'll say is that editors like me and Carrie are really looking for people who are not shy and who are aggressive, both in the way they go after stories, but probably if you have the quality to go after stories, you're probably going to have the ability to advocate for yourself sometimes too. And if you are particularly proud of a story that you've done, whether that's even at your college newspaper or a freelance story that you've done, or even frankly, to get in that first job is just basically to write up things as if you had gotten the job. You didn't hire me at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, but I still think that I could have given you this great story. What do you think? And I will tell you that persistence actually pays off with editors. And the Wall Street Journal tends not to hire straight out of college, but it hires kind of often someone who's just only been out a year or two. And the thing that they're looking for is a great, great story. And I know I'll give you the example of Michael Corkery, who's now at the New York Times. He every time he wrote a great story at the small paper where he was working, he would send it to the recruiter at the Wall Street Journal and said, I really think this is a great story. You ought to look at it. Why don't you hire me? And eventually one day he wrote such a great story that she was like, you're right. I'm gonna call that kid Michael Corkery. And so, like, whatever you have to get in front of the news organization that you think is the place where you belong, start building a relationship with an editor that will listen to you and show that editor what it is that you can do, including what they missed by not hiring you. I mean, there's a chance you'll eventually get a word from somebody saying, I'm too busy to have you deal with this anymore. But most of the time not. I love that kind of gumption in a reporter.
It's really great advice. And, I would add, just to make sure you've done a deep dive on the publication or the organization to which you are applying. We have a lot of people coming to us who haven't taken the time to do that, frankly, or they don't express a lot of interest in our case in business news in covering the tech sector. So, it's easy to weed people out who frankly who don't demonstrate that interest. And it's okay not to know about something, but you want to show some enthusiasm for the work that the organization does. We've had so many great questions. One involves, so you both started out as reporters, and now you are in editing and managerial roles. Can you talk to the group about the transition and how you feel about being an editor versus being a reporter?
For me, it was happenstance in a lot of ways. I never thought I wanted to be an editor. I thought it sounded like a terrible job because you have to worry about all these other people and you can't just, being a reporter is like the greatest thing because you control your life. You don't know, and I say that in that, you have a story you have to do. You don't have to be in the office if you don't need to, all these other things that used to be relevant before a pandemic. But I always thought being an editor sounded like a terrible role. But what I realized, when I was it was probably like my mid-30s, I had a very visceral experience when I was a young reporter where I was at a press conference and it was when I was, an intern working in the state legislature in New Jersey for the Times. And I was at a press conference and everybody, there was a bunch of older journalists griping and being very cynical about what the subject was that day. And I sort of told myself, wow, if I ever get to a point in my reporting career where I have any risk of being like that in any way, which I sort of thought, well, clearly it didn't seem like these people were waking up every day to try to kill it, right? To get the story, to have that hunger, to have that drive. And I sort of told myself early in my career, I was like, if I ever get to that point, I need to get out of it. Because I do believe that reporting requires so much energy and so much dedication every single day to get it right. We're writing about people's lives. They're human. You cannot lose that will to get it as right as we can. And probably in my mid-30s or late 30s, I can't remember what it was, I was sort of getting tired of the Washington story. It felt very repetitive and I just sort of remembered, I love journalism. I don't want to leave journalism, but I'm going to figure out what my next step is to grow and mature, in my career and just so happened, fell into it really when I went to Europe and ended up as a managing editor there. But what I realized at that point, I was looking for something new. I was looking for a new challenge. And I think it's about following your own cues as a journalist. If you love journalism, but what you're doing every day, you're sort of losing that drive, you need to, for your sake, re-examine and see what other great opportunities are out there. Newsrooms these days, there's so many different types of journalists that populate newsrooms. Visual journalists, data journalists, business journalists, politics, there's so many different opportunities. Finding a place where you do have that kind of ability to stretch. And for me, the transition to being an editor was exactly what I needed and didn't quite realize what I wanted until I did it. And that was I wanted to be part of something. I was sort of tired of looking from the outside in and, actually enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. That's another lesson about just keeping it on about where your career can lead you, the beats that you could do and the opportunities. Don't say no. Open your mind about something that you never thought before that you would ever want to do, because it will take you in surprising directions.
Thank you so much for that. Your experience is so valuable to hear about. A question that a number of people have asked in different forms is, how do you balance telling all sides of the story and still hold people accountable?
So I'll take that unless Jen, are you there?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that the only way that you can hold people accountable is if you have not only been digging and digging and digging and digging, but that you also are able to see and understand where somebody might be coming from that you are about to write about. And that's including if you are writing about them in a very damning way. And I'll give you a perfect example. We did an investigation not too long ago on the cruise ship industry and how they continued to launch cruises long after they knew that COVID was likely to be on many of those ships. And, and we were determined to pin down that they had to have known that this was dangerous. They had to have known that this was risky, and they did it anyway. And yet I thought it was really important that we didn't have just a simplistic and presumed explanation for their motive. Because while this was very much an economic decision and a financial decision, I wasn't ready to just basically say, and therefore they didn't care if they killed people. I actually don't believe that most people that we investigate are so heinous that they want to kill their own customers. And so I thought it was incredibly important that we dig down enough that we have the goods to call them on the mistakes that they made, and sometimes made in a way that was illegal or at least irresponsible, but also that we try to understand why they were making the decisions that they made, and that the explanation was probably not that they were just pure evil. And I think that's one of the things that's really important when you're doing these stories, is that you have talking about human things they're making from.
Thank you, Jen. A question from a couple of people who want to know, they're breaking into journalism and they're not fresh out of college, or they're in their late 20s, early 30s, or older. Sorry, Jen, we can't see you, but we can hear you. Sorry, we have a little bit of AV trouble.
How's that?
We can hear you. Yes. We don't have your video. But Jen, you might want to try refreshing your browser if you haven't already. Okay. So a question for Carrie while Jen refreshes. Do you consider, do you look differently at aspiring journalists who are mid-career, or they've switched from another career, so they're 30, they're 40? How do you look at their?
Yeah, I think we actually love seeing different types of, and in our newsroom, we need different types of journalists of all kinds, including backgrounds and experiences, people who have come to journalism later, people who worked. I have, reporters in my newsroom who did, tremendously fascinating things before they went into journalism. That enriches them as reporters, as people. Use those experiences to your advantage. I think the bottom line, those experiences are great and rich for a newsroom. Certainly at, my publication, we are looking for a body of work normally, jobs which are more entry level. But certainly, for anybody, we're looking for a body of work, a commitment to sort of the craft. And so that applies no matter what, but we're certainly, newsrooms should be places, and mine is one of them, where having a richness of experiences and diversity is incredibly important. And so lean into what your experience is. If you came to journalism late, that's cool. Like, focus in on that, find your strength, why you're from one place to another and why you're in journalism. But at the end of the day, like, it is about the clips that you have, back to Jen's point, the persistence you've showed, the news you've broken, the distinctive writing you've done. Like, it may not be that full spectrum, right? But if you're like a really good reporter and you've gotten a lot of, like, you forced changes, or you held somebody accountable, like, going back to the earlier question of how do you stand out and get people to respond to you, find out what you're good at, where your little bit of expertise is early on in your career when you're still figuring yourself out, but figure out what that is and lean into that. And I realized when I would apply for internships or jobs, I was a political reporter. People wanted to know, either how I held somebody accountable, how I changed a strategy, a great feature I wrote, but finding out that's about knowing also the place where you're going to go to. What do they want to know? What do they want to hear in terms of, what skill set you brought to the table? And I think, I think for folks who, whether you're out of college or, 20 years down the road, finding out what your strength is and leaning into that and emphasizing that, is a critical part of figuring out who you are as a journalist.
Thank you so much. A question for both of you. How do you deal with the loss of trust among readers?
Jen, I feel like I'm talking a little much. I'll say something really quickly. This is something that, I have been asked so many times since 2016 in particular. It would be an overwhelming question, particularly around the idea of, the media environment is so polarized. There's people who aren't reading, facts and facts matter, this whole big debate. I realize it's so overwhelming. What I boiled it down to for me was I have very discrete control over one newsroom, and that I needed to make sure that my newsroom was fact-based, fact-driven, and buttoned up when we went out there with something. And that I viewed it as much as responsibility for my newsroom and the credibility of Politico as it is for the media writ large. That I had to make sure that any time I went out there and punch somebody, that it had to be as airtight as possible. Had to be perfect, frankly. I mean, I sort of view this as like, I have to be perfect every day. Am I perfect every day? Is this publication perfect every day? No. But the stakes are really high for all of us. And what I could do was control what was in my that's the Politico newsroom, and that I could do things in a way that in my own corner of the world helped bring credibility, to this industry.
Jen, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with Carrie completely. I do think that people have become very skeptical about fact-based reporting in a way that frightens me, because it is our last refuge. The Wall Street Journal sometimes is accused of their stories are maybe not as fluidly written as some, and have been described as a steaming heap of facts. But that's what I think at the end of the day, I still feel is my safety net. Like, if we have chased down every single little fact, then we can defend that story, and we can know at the end of the day that not only is it right, but we can feel like everyone got a fair shot in the way that we covered that story. And I think that it's all the more important today, where everybody wants to spew opinion, everybody wants to fling out accusations, that our only hope in saving not only journalism, but I really believe our democracy, is still going back and checking it all out every time, every day, and getting it as right as we can. Because the moment you start to cross those lines into advocacy or opinion is the moment that you are perceived as no longer just towing the line and exposing the truth.
Great advice. And Carrie, if you haven't already, could we ask you to refresh your browser one more time? So sorry about this, but some people are hearing a lot of garbled audio. Jen, a question for you. A lot of people's questions have touched on this. For every investigation that you publish, there are a lot of other things that your team has presumably looked into and abandoned at some point. How do you keep that ratio favorable so that you, or however you define that, so that you don't spend a lot of time, months and months on stories that never run? Right.
Yeah, if we spend months and months on something and it doesn't run, then I've done my job very poorly. One of the things that we try to do is we do a lot of memo writing in the beginning. We try to explore, why do we think this is a story? Why do we think this is an important story? I'll use the example of Predator on the Reservation, the film that we did with Frontline. In the beginning, I didn't know if we would find a single person who knew Weber, much less one of his victims, and whether any of those people would talk to us. And so I sent the reporter and a cameraman out for a week to Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And I said, you got a week. See if you can find anything. And I was really skeptical that we wouldn't, and that would be the end of it. 1 week of footage and we were done. And we'd move on to something else. When they came back and they had gotten much more than we expected, then we said, okay, well, maybe we have something here. Maybe we have a short story. Maybe we have a 10-minute documentary to go with it. So I sent the reporters out again for another week. And they came back with even more stuff. And we decided maybe we have a 20-minute documentary and a little bit longer story. In the end, we did an hour-long documentary and a year-long series. But each of those things was kind of incremental. We were testing ourselves each time. Are we getting the good? Is it still the story we thought we would get? Are we still getting the access that we need? And I was willing to pull the plug each time and just meet a certain bar to keep from expending months and months and months and there being nothing to pay off for it. It still happens. Sometimes you can investigate something for months and then realize you just didn't ever get the goods. But if you're managing the project right, the risks of that should be minimal.
Carrie, can you tell us, thanks Jen, how do you manage that at Politico?
I'm sorry, I missed the question because I was refreshing my browser. So
that's right. So working on stories that basically don't pan out, how do you minimize that from happening?
I guess I feel like it happens. It can be a disappointment. I guess at my level, I am not as in the nitty gritty as Jen is. Like for an investigative team, that is such a I couldn't even imagine Jen, right? Like I've never worked on an IT the way you have, that pressure of spending months and not coming up with anything. We have that here on stories for sure. I think that the idea that Jen said about writing, setting a bar and getting the best story that you can, often I find the best way to go about investigative reporting these days is write what you know when you know it. That's a different way to go about investigative reporting. That's sort of more of the model that we follow at Politico, which is we, because, and especially, we're writing about the White House, Congress, the government, it's a heavily competitive environment in a lot of ways, that sometimes we have to do things in stages to make sure, and sometimes that's also the best way to sort of pull stuff out, because sources emerge. You do one story, you lay down a marker, you keep reporting, and you do the next story, and so on and so forth. And that has been more of how we've approached it here than sort of stepping back and spending, 3-6 months, a year. We don't have that we're not set up to do that. We're set up to have our beat reporters paired up with high-level investigative editors who have a different skill than their frontline editors, to work on those, deeper dive, highly accountability-driven stories. And we always try to go for, when we have the story locked down and it's going to be impactful and it's going to move the ball, let's go with it. Times we do hold back, but that is sort of how we deal with it at Politico.
We've had, as you can imagine, a lot of questions about breaking in and getting jobs, especially in this very difficult economic climate. How do you view people who have worked in communications, public relations at any point in their career? Is that an obstacle or not an issue anymore for you?
It depends. I think that's how I would answer it. I think it depends. I think, again, what I wouldn't say is like you going straight from communications into journalism, again, without having some of that track record, clips, experience, to show me, because that's what we're hiring for, someone who has the reporting skills, the writing skills, those, sort of that package. But I would say we've hired unorthodox candidates to take on high profile roles here who don't have the traditional background, that did come maybe, in Europe, our playbook writer was somebody who had been in politics and then communications, but was clearly a journalist, but knew the town of Brussels, and we were looking for something like that. And he turned out to be a great hire. So I think it is about, it just depends. But in no way would I turn against it, but it is it is a little bit more of a struggle, I would say. Given, you need to have that sort of portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Jen, do you have anything to add about people who've worked?
From my point of view, once upon a time when I was probably a young hiring editor, I might have said, we're not looking for people who have ever decided that they wanted to be on the other side. I no longer think that way. The industry has retracted so much that I totally understand that everybody has to pay the bills. Now, you still have to make the case that you're the best journalist for the job that I'm hiring for. And so for people who have built up a track record, you may find it difficult to compete if a lot of your resume is not journalism based. But even when I got hired at my first job in journalism because I had worked in a prison and the newspaper was looking for someone to cover prisons. And I made the case that nobody was better qualified than I, because I was the only one who actually knew what was happening in the prison, and I could come up with 35 stories a week about prisons, and I got the job. So I wasn't in communications. I was actually teaching a pre-release and aftercare program at a prison, but it was the one thing that I could argue that nobody else could argue for that particular position. And I'm just not in a situation where I just will dismiss resumes out of hand for anything that anybody is doing to pay the bills.
Thanks, Jen. Roughly, it looks like we're about out of time. So I wanted to thank Jen and Carrie for spending time with us and for sharing their experience for the fantastic advice and perspectives that they've offered. Really appreciate it. For those of you who can, we have another new summer school happening on Thursday when two journalists from the Information, Nick Wingfield and Amira Flabi, will be joined by Kevin Delaney, the founder of Quartz, who's now at the New York Times. So I think that will be another great conversation. If you're interested, you can move on over to the networking channel, which might be on your left. My hands. To meet some other participants in today's session virtually. So thank you again, Jen and Carrie. This has been a great conversation and a real privilege to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having
My
us.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.